So I'll just begin our presentation. Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. We are just so pleased to have you all join us this morning for Ministry Pacific's Active Shooter webinar with the one and only Sergeant Ryan Sanchez. We have over 90 different churches joining us this morning and over 300 viewers throughout all of those churches, and we are just so blessed by the large turnout. We pray that this presentation is beneficial to you and your church, that you guys learned something new and important and are really just blessed by this event today. My name is Ashley Laskin. I am the founder and CEO of IMG Design. We are a boutique web design and marketing agency that strives to create websites, templates, business cards, anything you name it, just tons of beneficial marketing resources for organizations to better represent themselves to their audience and congregations. I have been working with Ministry Pacific for the last year and have found that their expertise in property and liability insurance to be just enlightening, and their true heart and passion for the church very inspiring. I personally love working with churches and working with companies who are passionate about working with churches, because I also serve in the church, and my husband does as well. We're both worship pastors at our church in Seattle. And I just love that the entire staff of Ministry Pacific all serve in their churches as well. It's a huge reason why they're so focused on taking care of the churches that they insure. So on behalf of Ministry Pacific, we would like to thank you for participating in this timely and important presentation. Again, we apologize for the delay and for any technical mishaps. Regarding Ministry Pacific, they are an independent commercial insurance broker specializing in insurance and providing risk management resources to churches. Given their independence, they are not beholden to any one insurance company, so as a result, they work selectively with their carriers who best meet the needs of the church clients. Great American Insurance Company is one of those carriers who has a long, distinguished history of insuring nonprofits and other religious organizations as well. In today's church insurance market, they are at the forefront of providing the most cost-effective and innovative and comprehensive coverage, especially when it comes to traumatic incident coverage. So to find out more about that coverage, please contact Ministry Pacific and go ahead and request a policy review session to discuss that and other important coverages protecting the financial well-being of your church. Now, again, without further ado, for the second time, I'm going to present on behalf of Ministry Pacific, Sergeant Ryan Sanchez, founder of Crisis Management Solutions. So sorry, Ryan, you have to give a little bit of a double take here, but thank you again for joining us and for offering this to us.
No worries. Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate you and Pacific Ministry for providing the opportunity to speak to everybody and for setting up the webinar. As Ashley said, my name is Ryan Sanchez. I'm the president of Crisis Management Solutions, which is a company that I started in 2013. A little bit about me real quick. I grew up in a Christian family. When I was in high school, I met my wife, where her family was very heavily involved in a church, and mainly, especially youth ministry. And I started really heavily attending church at that point in time, and just developed a passion at that time to serve in the church. I assisted with junior high youth groups, and when I was in college, there was an opportunity to become the interim youth director, because the youth pastor at that point in time had moved on to another church where he was an associate pastor. So that was my calling, and I was able to slide in as a youth director. It was one of the best jobs, even to date, that I've ever had the most fun. And truly it was a blessing. Now I attend a much smaller non-denominational church, and I've attended churches from extremely large churches, which I consider like mega churches, to much smaller churches like the one I serve in now. A little bit more about me. I've been in law enforcement for 23 years. I'm currently a sergeant with the Livermore Police Department. I specialize in tactics and active shooter instructors for law enforcement. I'm also the assistant team leader for a regional tactical team as a hostage negotiator. So I've taken all of that experience plus some and put it into to this company. I spent tell people I got my vast interest in safety as I spent 8 years as a school resource officer, I was assigned to a high school that had about 2,200 students. And 2006 was my first year there at that high school. And in 2007, Virginia Tech happened. And that was kind of where I really sat back after that incident happened and asked myself a bunch of questions. I asked myself, were we prepared as a school to deal with an incident of that magnitude? Did we have the infrastructure in place to deal with something of that magnitude or even much smaller magnitude? And the answer was no. And so I started, at that point in time, I started looking at our policies, procedures, the way we did business, some of the infrastructure we had in place, and I'll talk more about infrastructure later, and started to try to make some changes. And, changes, unfortunately, sometimes they take a little bit of time, but that's what we did. We went from hardly doing any training, no drills, and I would say an unprepared state to a very prepared state. I remember the first time doing a lockdown drill at that school. It took several minutes. And when I say several minutes, probably more like 3 or 4 minutes. It was so embarrassing I didn't even really want to time in. And with practice and training and continued to work with a staff of, well over 125 at that school, we actually got where we were able to lock down a campus of 2,200 students in less than 30 seconds, which, and for a school of that size, that's extremely good. As we go through this presentation, there are a lot of different topics that we're going to discuss. Some of these topics, we can easily spend an hour apiece on them. We've kind of divided or said there's 3 types of people in this world. There's the sheep, the wolves, and the sheepdogs. And the sheep, for the most part, they're gentle, kind, productive creatures, and really only hurt people by accident. And it's not meant to be negative or anything like that, but that's just who the sheep are. And I would say most people fit in the sheep category. And then there are the wolves, and the wolves will feed on the sheep. They don't have mercy. They're the ones out there attacking. And then there's the sheepdog. And I would say that most of us here that are listening to this presentation are probably in that sheepdog category. We're here to try to protect the flock, and we're here to confront the wolves. As we talk about different things, I have some questions for you. And again, it's how prepared are you? How prepared is your church? How prepared are you to deal if an incident was to occur on the campus of your church or in your building on Sunday during your service? Are you prepared to deal with a critical incident? And it doesn't have to be an active shooter incident, but are you prepared to deal with bomb threats? Are you prepared to deal with medical emergencies? Are you prepared to deal with lost children? Are you prepared to deal with fires and all of those other critical incidents? And when we talk here, we're doing a lot of talking about active shooter, active threat, but are you prepared to deal with all of those different critical incidents that I just named, and plus many more? And I would take to guess that most of us would probably say no. We're not quite there yet. That's why we're here listening to this. And so I challenge you as you're going through this is looking at ways that you can improve the safety of your church. We're going to talk about the trained response versus the untrained response. One more here. So the trained response versus the untrained response. In that cycle of response, there's always a critical incident that occurs. There's going to be 2 things that are going to happen no matter if you have a trained response or untrained response. There's going to be startle and fear, and then there's going to be perception and reaction. Pretty much those 2 things are always going to happen, no matter how trained or untrained you are. And the trained response, again, this is so you've gone through some to significant training. You're going to have some anxiety that's going to happen. That's a given. It's going to happen no matter how trained you are. You can train it where the anxiety might be very minimal, but there's going to be some kind of anxiety that this critical incident just happened. Then there's going to be recall, and you're going to start recalling based upon your training. You're going to start, thinking of what you learned in your training, your experiences, past critical incidents that you've been involved with, and you're going to start recalling what you should do next. And then you're going to prepare. Again, this is all coming from your trained response, and then you're going to commit to act. Versus the untrained response, it's completely the opposite. Instead of being anxious, you're going to be panic. Instead of recalling, you're going to be in disbelief. You're going to be doubting that this is even going to happen. And then instead of being prepared, you're going to be in denial, which is even worse. You're saying it can't be happening here. You're dismissing that the critical incident is occurring. And then the last one is helplessness. Instead of committing to your actions, you're feeling helplessness, or what some people will oftentimes refer to as like sitting in a fetal type position. The history of active shooter events aren't anything new, but they are becoming more and more prevalent in society. Sad to say that they're happening so frequently that we're not even hearing about them most of the time unless there's multiple casualties. To date, and this was as of 2 days ago, I didn't update it in the last 2 days, and I guarantee you it's changed, but to date, just in the last, 3 months and 10 days, there have been 62 mass shootings in the United States. Okay, so I'm not talking about any particular category, schools, churches, anything, but total of 62 mass shootings in the United States. Since 1999, there have been 9 mass shootings at churches. And for the most part, churches were always considered that safe haven, that safe grounds. Even I used to be involved with gang enforcement, and the gangs, the culture was churches were always off limits. But we're starting to even see a rise in violence, even with gang-related behavior surrounding churches. In 2015 was probably the second most significant church shooting in the last at least almost 20 years, where the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church shooting in Charleston, South Carolina happened, where 9 people were killed and one was injured during their Bible study. And then you go to just last year, and I'm sure this is what sparked a lot of this, is the First Baptist church shooting in Sutherland Springs, Texas, where 27 people were killed and 20 were injured. And again, I think for churches, that was pretty much the 9/11 for churches. I think a lot of time I've heard it from my church, I've heard it from other churches, that was kind of like the big wake up call, that churches need to provide more of a safe atmosphere, because quite honestly, if you're not providing that safe atmosphere for people to attend and they don't have that sense of safety, it does, I guarantee it's going to hurt church attendance. So as a church, when you're trying to define your security needs, there's many things that you need to consider. You need to consider the size of your church, the geographical area or demographical area of the church is located, the culture of the church. The culture of the church is probably one of the things that, and it doesn't have to be the culture of a church, because it could be the culture of a school, it could be the culture of a business. Those are some of the harder things to break when you're trying to talk about defining the security needs. The history and previous incidents that have happened, or scares that have happened at a church, are also going to be factors in defining your security needs. If you've had multiple critical incidents that have happened at your churches, you're more likely to move forward with implementing new security measures and having a security plan in place, an emergency action and response plan, and start providing training and doing drills and all of this stuff, because you've experienced this in real life. Also, in defining security needs, you have to look at your physical assessments. You look at your infrastructure, and I've mentioned infrastructure a couple times, and that could be your door locking hardware, surveillance cameras, it could be gates, access control. There's a lot of things that can go into the physical assessment, or what we call the infrastructure portion of the assessment. And then there's a procedural assessment. We have to look at the way we're doing business, and we have to look at the way that people are funneling in and out of the churches, parking lots, everything from the minute that they drive or walk onto the campus or grounds of your church, to socializing outside the church, to entering the buildings. It doesn't matter if it's for youth programs, office buildings, or the church itself for service. We have to look at the way that we're doing business and trying to define our security needs. I will tell you that prevention is probably, without a doubt, the most key, and we have to have a proactive approach when it comes to prevention. Prevention, they say that somewhere between 75 and 85%, and I know I use schools a lot because that's the most closely they have more historical data and stats when it comes to schools than any other type of active shooter event. But they say that between 75 and 85% of active shooter events at school could have been prevented if somebody would have just said something. And I'll tell you from experience that is absolutely true. I've had many incidences in my career where I've had people saying, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you do something? Because this is after the fact. And they said, well, we didn't want to get involved. We didn't want to leave our name. We wanted it to be anonymous and stuff. So when we start looking at that, we're looking at red flags and indicators. The first bullet point there. So some red flags and potential violence and indicators. It could be anything from depression, withdrawal. It can be problems at home, problems in community, relationship problems. It could be a lot of different things coming in. And when we start looking at those, it's when we have multiple of those red flags and warning signs starting to come up, that should start drawing some concern. There are also red flags and warning signs, indicators that alone should draw some great attention. It could be someone doing research on mass shootings. It could be fascination with weapons, explosives, violence. It could be somebody, with suicidal tendencies and attempts and depression. It could be people that have made hit lists, people that have written journals. I've had all of this. In my days as a school resource officer, it's a school that's in a very nice area. I've had kids making hit lists. I've had kids writing journals. One was titled "The Perfect School Shooting." I've had people, say that they're going to bring guns to school. And again, these red flags and warning signs and indicators, some of them went ignored, but some of them definitely came to the forefront. Other prevention stages is understanding the 5 stages of an active shooter, because the 5 stages of an active shooter are very important. And again, these are the same 5 stages of a suicidal subject. You can take these same 5 stages. There's the fantasy stage. This is the stage that they're really thinking about the process, thinking about the act, thinking about the active shooter or committing suicide. They're going to be showing some kinds of red flags and warning signs during this stage. Then there's the planning stage. They're starting to consider the victims. They're gathering information. They're looking for infrastructure and how to defeat security. The preparation stage. There might be obtaining weapons, explosive devices. They might be doing a dry run or testing the system. They might be going to the range. And I use this one because Virginia Tech, there's video of Cho walking down a range, and they interviewed people afterwards. But he was walking down a range where he had objects on the ground at almost like that were simulating people sitting at a desk. It was extremely odd behavior for being at a range, and yet nobody said anything till afterwards. After Virginia Tech happened, that's when people came forward and said, you know what, I need to report this. I was at this range, and this is what I saw. Thought it was extremely odd, and again, it was reported after the fact. Then I'll kind of, with those first 3, so we have the fantasy stage, the planning stage, the preparation stage. In my opinion, those are the 3 most important stages to stop an active shooter or a suicidal subject during those things. Those are the signs. Those 3 stages is when we're gathering information, we're seeing behavior changes, we're seeing a lot of things go on with that individual. And if we're going to stop an active shooter from happening, usually it's in those 3 stages. Then there's the approach stage. So the approach stage, again, extremely dangerous because this person's committed to carrying out their plan or their attack at that point in time, and the implementation stage. And unfortunately, the implementation stage at that point in time, we are too late at that time. They are in the process of carrying out their attack. Anonymous reporting systems, again, part of the prevention piece. The federal government years ago, probably about 3 to 4 years ago, came out with a campaign, See Something, Say Something. That is something that our company has really, really taken to heart, and we believe that everybody should have some kind of anonymous reporting system that encourages people to come forward, report suspicious concerning behavior, and let people know about what they're observing. because we believe that early intervention is the key and to prevent or foil any attacks from occurring. And as a church, it doesn't matter if the church, school, business, workplace violence, whatever it is, we believe that institutions need to integrate technology into the anonymous reporting, because just as this picture illustrates, is what do people have in their hand nearly 365 days a year, 24 hours a day? A phone. And so if you have a system to do anonymous reporting, we're finding that people are more likely to report if you have some kind of integrated technology into your anonymous prevention piece. And so that is something that we have something called reportnow.us, and it's a website that we have. We customize them for each individual school, church, business, whatever it is, and it's an anonymous reporting system. Basically, it's like an app, but it's used through a link. We do it intentionally to do it through a link because it'll fit with any desktop, any phone, and what it does is it allows people to report either anonymous or leave their identity if they so choose to, and they basically will fill out any concerning behavior, suspicious activity, anything that's concerning whatsoever. It allows people to fill out, and in a matter of less than a minute, they can report that incident. And what our system does versus a lot of other systems won't do is you can actually screenshot pages, you can attach files, you can attach all these different things to the report. So the recipient, if it happens to be at a church, it could be the pastoral staff, the head of security, it can be all these different people in a distribution list. Within seconds from hitting send, they're going to have that at their fingertips as far as what they're reporting. So again, anonymous reporting systems, we're really in favor of developing that. It's kind of the old suggestion box that people use, but people just don't use suggestion boxes anymore. They want to integrate technology into that. Also, while we're on the topic of prevention, is offering resources. We find that not only in churches, schools, businesses, but if you have some kind of resource, you have a wide variety of resources that you offer, we find that helps or greatly helps with the prevention piece. It could be from general counseling, it can be from substance abuse counseling, it can be from mental health, medical, marriage and recovery, youth counseling, financial aid, domestic violence, victim of sexual assaults, group, individual. If you have, the more resources you have that you're able to provide your congregation, that's going to help more to the prevention. I know that oftentimes, it's to have all of those that I just listed, it is very costly, but a lot of times, within the congregation, you have people that are counselors and people that will donate their time and be on call and stuff. And again, that's another way to serve in another ministry within the church if you can get those people on board. And then threat assessments. Our last portion of the prevention piece is threat assessments. And threat assessments, and we're not talking about infrastructure, we're talking about people. These are individuals or a group of people. It's a way to further assess people to see if they pose any kind of threat to the church or to the community. And usually when you have somebody bring some attention to you and says, this person has this concerning, threatening behavior that concerns me about them, there's usually three things that happen. One, they've either expressed that this person's an immediate danger to themselves or other, which you usually, for the most part, call on law enforcement. They do a psychiatric evaluation on them to see if they meet the criteria. And when I say psychiatric, they're not doctors or anything, but they're just seeing if they meet the criteria that they're a danger to themselves or others. And then they put them on a psychiatric detention and they go and seek immediate help. Or it's criminal in nature and you involve law enforcement, and law enforcement comes and investigates it, and if there's criminal act, they do what they need to do for that end. Or if it's non-criminal, that kind of falls into the third thing. So if it's non-criminal, a lot of churches, schools, community organizations, businesses, that's the part that they struggle with most, because they go, okay, they didn't meet the criteria that they can be on a psychiatric detention. That is not criminal in nature. What do we do with this person? And as a church, this is extremely important, because we need to provide resources. We need to to see if this person, possibly still is a threat to not just the church, but to the community. And having a threat assessment or threat assessment team is key. We implemented this about 2 years ago. It's basically a procedure, and it's done in a team environment. But a team of individuals, they go through this procedure, and they try to determine if this person is still a threat, and that they need to take any other action, if they need to provide them resources. But that's the key, is helping them all along. And and as a church, that's what we want to do. We want to help these people through the process. We don't just want to say, you pose a threat to us, we're going to cast you out, and you're on your own. We want to try to help these people, and this is a good way to reach out further to these people. And the last part of the prevention piece is acting upon your gut feeling. If you need to trust your gut feeling, if you think that somebody poses a threat to themselves, threats to other, we need to make sure that we're taking those steps and doing what's necessary to get them the assistance that they need. The next topic we're going to talk about is dealing with members in the congregation that pose concerning behaviors. And this kind of goes back to what we just talked about. As a church, we want to be accepting, we want to be inviting, we want to help everybody and help people. We want to try to work through their problems, but we also need to worry about the safety of the church. And at that, when we talk about that, it's having resources in place to help deal with people that might pose a threat or some kind of concerning behavior to the church, and how we deal with it. There's this topic alone, we can go on for quite some time, but there's a lot of different ways to deal with people that are concerning to the church. Are they concerning emotionally? Are they physically? Do we think that they have the possibility or the potential to commit a violent act against people or the church itself? So these are all things that we need to think about when we're dealing with people that might have a concerning behavior towards you. Security teams. There are different levels, which I've kind of broken down into pretty much 4 different levels of security teams. I'll say the first level, the lowest level, is kind of the greeters and ushers, functioning kind of as a security team, provided minimal training. They're just kind of eyes and ears, helping people with their supplemental duties and everything. Then there's informal security teams. Informal security teams have some training, but it's usually minimal. And they're kind of just, again, eyes and ears, but they're not serving a second duty like being an usher or a greeter. They're more out there. They're a little bit more attentive to what's going on the church campus. And then there's formal security teams. Formal security teams, they have a moderate to high level of training. They're a little bit more organized, usually have a higher level of communication, higher level of, they might even have a hierarchy where they have supervisors, people that they report to and such. But that's kind of that's the third step. And then the last one is more, even a higher level formal. It's either armed or unarmed security teams. And when we talk about armed and unarmed, some churches I know will use law enforcement, military people to serve on their security teams. I know there's people that will use people that have concealed carry weapons permits to serve on their security teams. And then there's churches that also do third-party security firms that are trained and not associated with the church, but are brought in as a third-party security team. And when we talk about arming our security teams, there is a lot that goes into it. And for anybody that's considering it, I'm not going to come out. I'm a firm believer. The only thing that'll stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy. I'm a firm believer in that. However, having said that, there is so much liability that goes into arming a security team. And we're going to talk about that more in just a little bit. Also, with assembling a security team, you should be assembling a safety planning committee as well. You need to have emergency action and response plan in place. If you don't, it's something that needs to be developed and implemented within the church. It's your emergency action response for each and every type of critical incident that you may experience. You know, if you live in an area where tsunamis might be prevalent, you need to make sure you have a policy in place for that. If tornadoes or if earthquakes, depending on where you live, you have to alter your plan according to that. There are definitely things that the planner and every emergency action response plan, or policies in every emergency action response plan, just because, you know, active shooter, lockdowns, shelter in place, you know, vehicle collisions, medical, vicious animals, lost children. There's a lot of different plans that are going to be standard throughout, no matter what. Having security team policies in place, they need to say what your security team can and cannot do. It's got to talk about their responsibilities and their roles as a security team. The policies need to provide a standard and provide training. They have to address means of communication and a tiered level of supervision, because the supervision, again, we want to have some kind of hierarchy that people are reporting to on the security teams. And again, I'm a firm believer that having a security team in place will minimize any critical incident. You go to Sutherland Springs in Texas. I don't know if any of you guys have watched the video, but the video clearly shows the shooter. He crosses the street with a rifle, assault rifle. He shoots multiple times. He circles around the church building before he goes into the front door. If a security team would have been in place, and again, this is Monday morning quarterbacking, but if the security team would have been in place, they could have potentially, and more than likely, been able to secure and lock those front doors, which would either prevented or slowed down the shooter from getting into the church, potentially saving all to most lives. So again, there are a lot of things that there's huge benefits in assembling a security team. Other things that security teams should be, they should be visible, they should patrol the grounds, identify problems and concerns, they should monitor the flow of people coming and going, and they need to be able to take command and control over all critical incidences. Now, as we talked earlier, was talking about armed versus unarmed, and the huge L word comes up, liability. And there is so much liability when it comes to arming somebody. And you know, there's definitely liability that comes up with having a security team, but there's also liability for negligence for not having a security team. But when we talk about armed versus unarmed, and this is not meant to be any kind of a debate as far as arming versus unarming, but I want to put some of the facts out there as far as things to consider. Because there's no doubt whatsoever that it is a higher level of increased liability. There's a selection process. If these people are serving in a security team setting, they need to be backgrounded. You know, I know Jeff Schweg's here with LiveScan, and he's worked with Pacific Ministry. They need to be backgrounded. All individuals should be backgrounded. And in my opinion, anybody that's working with children on a security team minimally should be backgrounded, and you know, to almost being all of your volunteers being backgrounded, but minimally people that are on a security team and working directly with children should be backgrounded. The qualifications, how do we do standards for qualifications, and the qualifications for the person? I'm not even talking about, you know, carrying armed, but you know, what kind of qualifications are you going to set forth for somebody that, if you were thinking or considering doing an armed security team? Training goes from range. There has to be use of force options, and law enforcement, you know, you have to have all these other use of force options available to you, and the same would apply with a security team. You know, you can't just escalate it to an armed response. There has to be other intermediary options in between that. There's de-escalation. There has to be de-escalation training, first aid, medical training, use of force reporting. There are a lot of considerations that go into arming any kind of a security team. There's got to be record keeping and continued training. And again, this is just a short list of things to consider, but there's definitely it's a lot to consider when trying to decide if you wanted to have an armed versus unarmed. As you know, there's definitely law enforcement officers that are probably in your congregation that rightfully legally conceal carry within your church, and they have every right to do so, unless you as a church you absolutely prevent them from doing so. They have every right to conceal carry, and those are people that I would suggest that you consult with if you're considering establishing any kind of a security team, and especially any kind of an armed security team. And you can definitely have different layers. If you wanted to have police officers that are off duty that are strategically placed around the campus, and then have your regular security team that's unarmed doing the day-to-day duties, the communication, everything that we previously talked about. The next thing we're going to talk about is church philosophy and security. I know that some churches, and it's not just churches, but I know some churches might frown upon high visibility of security teams because they might believe that it gives the negative impression that the church isn't safe. You have actually quite the opposite in a lot of cases too. Some churches believe that it gives the impression that the church is, at the forefront of security. They're taking security serious. They want to provide a safe environment for everybody. Again, this is just some of the philosophy that you have. Many times it might have been something in the community. It could even be something, like we talked about Sutherland Springs, a critical incident that's happened around the world or in our immediate community that has actually changed church philosophy. And then we talk about securing and unsecuring doors. Churches, they need to be inviting, but there needs to be a balance in regards to security. Churches need to consider the minimal number of entry points. And what I tell people, and again, I do a lot of work with K-12 and higher ed schools, but I tell K-12 schools is what is the fewest number of entry points that you can have into the building or into the campus. And what we do from that point, we minimize it down to the fewest number of entry points, and then we decide that those are the minimum number, and that's what we stick with. I had a school one time that had, this a smaller school, it had 320 students, 325 students. They had 7 or 8 entry points, and they had entry points, and it was just in one little square block, the school, and they had literally 7 or 8 entry points around the campus, and it was all about minimizing the entry and exit points. And it's important because the perimeter is what we're trying to protect around schools, businesses, churches, everything. Even you go into Silicon Valley to the high-tech firms, they're all controlling points of entry and points of exit just for safety concerns, because they're trying to control it and provide a higher level of security. Multiple entry points, again, are okay as long as they're staffed and they remain staffed. If you have 5 entry points to your church, then they need to be at least visually monitored so that they can notice any threats or any concerning behaviors that might be approaching the church. Again, like I said earlier, it's better to minimize the entry points to as few as possible. And then, there needs to be a balanced, safe environment. And in churches, and I hear the same thing with schools. They need to be an open, inviting place, but there has to be that balance. As far as putting a plan into action, the physical assessment of the church, facility, and grounds, this is the time where we identify areas of concerns. We recommend implementing and making improvements to making the structural and the physical assessment safer. Again, the reason we do that is because we want to deter, we want to stop, and we want to slow down any threats that may be coming to the church. And most importantly, by doing so, we're increasing safety, we're increasing awareness and training, and we're decreasing liability just by doing a physical assessment of the church. And I can tell you, I've done probably 150 to 200 physical assessments, and they're key because there's so many things that you can do improvement wise. Some of them are just procedural changes. They're not even really infrastructural changes. They're just procedural changes. You change the way you do business, and you've greatly increased the physical assessment of the church. Implementing and updating emergency action and response plans. I don't know, and this is a question that you guys need to ask yourself, is when's the last time you guys have updated your emergency action response plan, if you have one? Because what we find is most, and it doesn't matter if you're talking about churches, community organizations, businesses, schools, most people, when they first implement it, they do very little as far as going over it, reviewing it minimally annually to make sure that there's no changes, because things constantly change. I use kind of law enforcement as a thing. There's constantly change in law enforcement, and they've changed. Things constantly change. You go back to Columbine. During Columbine, officers did not enter the campus. They held the perimeter, waited for SWAT to come in to deal with the problem. After Virginia Tech, or after Columbine, they said we no longer can wait. We need to train officers to go in as cells to be able to deal with the problem. So they had 4-man cells. After Virginia Tech, they said we no longer can wait for 4 officers. We need to do it in 2 to 3. After Sandy Hook, they said we no longer can wait for 2 to 3. We need to teach single officer response. So as times change, the policies and procedures always change. And one thing that our company does is about every 6 months, we go through and we make changes with the times, because times are constantly changing. I'll take bomb threats, for instance. There's a huge push not to evacuate people on bomb threats or suspicious packages. You have a suspicious package outside a building A, and you have people in building C, D, and E. You look at the size of the package, then you go to the blast radius of what is the danger area for that size package, and you only evacuate the people that you need to evacuate. Because a lot of times, if you evacuate everybody in building C, D, E, and F, you're actually going to put them in greater danger. So that's something recently that we made some changes, because industry standard is saying we need to change those. So training all decision makers, and this is all of you. It's knowing your responsibilities, managing a critical incident. The critical incident isn't going to happen. Well, I shouldn't say isn't going to be long drawn out. They can be, but for the most part, mainly active shooter incidences, they're usually over within 2 to 5 minutes. So they end fairly quickly. But it's all the post and the recovery portion of the critical incident that people need to manage. There's the reunification, there's the recovery, there's dealing with media, providing counseling. There's a lot of fallout that happens over these critical incidents. I've been to numerous debriefs of active shooter events, and been the Boston bombing, and I mean, just numerous ones. Probably been to about 10 to 12 of them of debriefs. And always the things that come up the most is a critical incident. Yes, it was absolutely a horrific event. There was loss of life. There was chaos. However, the thing that they take the most heat from, or the most criticism from, is the post-critical incident and managing that post-critical incident. And that's where we believe that we need to train all the decision makers, all the staff members on how to deal with that. Provide additional training for staff. Staff should be trained minimally, in my opinion, at least once a year, if not more often. And that training needs to be continued training. We continue training by doing tabletop exercises and providing drills. Tabletop exercises, they're perfect. They usually take anywhere between, they can be as little as 5 to 10 minutes and as long as 15 to 30 minutes. But usually tabletop exercises, they're really good because it gives people a way to talk out how they would handle that critical incident and gives people the insight, and you learn from everybody, because you'll, even if you're the head of security for your church and you do a tabletop exercise, you may learn something from other people as long as you have an open, dialogue and communication with everybody, and people can voice their opinions freely and saying, hey, this is what I did, this is what worked and what worked well, and this is what failed and didn't work right, and what kind of improvements are we going to do, and doing after action reports and all of that stuff. That's all going to increase your decision making, and ultimately it's going to decrease your liability by doing that. Because unfortunately in this day and age, that the critical incident is to happen, it doesn't matter where it is. People are going to be looking for deep pockets. They're going to be looking to sue people, and you're going to have to possibly provide training records. You're going to have to say what's your emergency action response plan. So you're going to have to say who you've trained. You're going to have to say how often you've trained them. You're going to have to provide this records, because they're going to be, you're either going to have to provide them in a deposition, or they're going to get them through some kind of a subpoena process. As far as that, again, we want to make sure that we're training all staff members how to handle these critical incidents and what their roles and responsibilities may be during these critical incidents. Want to go to the next one? Okay. This is the information I spoke to earlier about LiveScan. This is Capital LiveScan. You guys can there's the link right there where you can see this publication. You can get some more information from Jeff Schweg and his services that are available. I'd like to thank you for your time. And if I can be of any assistance, I know there was a graphic earlier that kind of showed what I consider a 360 wrap of services that we provide. I'll kind of just tell you real quick, but it's we provide site assessments. There it is right there. Site assessments, update or implement your emergency action response plan. We train all the decision makers. We believe that the decision makers are the ones that are training the decision makers and training them how to respond during a critical incident. Usually that's, for me, that's almost it's about an 8 to 12 hour training, depending on how we customize it. Training all employees, educating, familiarizing, and empower them to make decisions. Because quite honestly, they need to feel empowered. They need to feel that they can make these decisions, because they're not going to have somebody there to always make the decisions for them. Continued training, tabletop exercises, scenarios, drills. They're very important. We need to do lockdown drills during stagnant times and during times where people are moving around, and minimally with staff. And it'd be good to be able to do them with people actually on your church campuses as well. And the threat assessment team, like I said earlier, it's a procedure to assess reported at-risk people, and then the anonymous reporting line. Again, those are our kind of wrap of services that we provide. And I'd like to thank you very much for your time and for the ability to be able to talk to you and discuss some concerns that you have. And I want to be able to open it up for any questions that you might have. And then I think Ashley's going to help us facilitate that. And any questions whatsoever, I'll answer. I'll open it up. And then also my contact information is right there. Feel free to call, email, or go to my website as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Sergeant Ryan. We are just so thankful on behalf of Ministry Pacific and all of our churches that have joined us today. We are just so thankful for you and for your service to our country and in California, and the school districts that you've helped and the churches that you've helped implement these plans through crisis management solutions. We just thank you and we bless you today. We have a few questions already, so let me read them to you and you can go ahead and answer them.
Okay.
Let's see. Do you have a resource for us to use to find places for all of the trainings that you mentioned?
So So a lot of my training has become from law enforcement, and if you go to my website, you can see all of the training that I've been to. I've been to numerous Homeland Security trainings. Some of them are where civilians can attend. Most of them are for law enforcement or sworn personnel, but there are definitely resources. You know, if you go to Department of Homeland Security, they have PDFs on active shooter prevention. You might be able to find some templates for certain for like generic implementing policies and procedures, implementing a emergency action and response plan. There's a lot of resources. I would say probably the best resource would be the Department of Homeland Security's website.
That's excellent. Yes, and we also have, because I know that website can be somewhat overwhelming. We on Ministry Pacific's website have a tab that says safety, and if you go to www.ministrypacific.com and then click safety, there's a few resources there. There's Sergeant Ryan's Wisdom Magazine feature, and then we also have some of our favorite pieces from the Homeland Security website, Department of Homeland, on there. So then you don't have to necessarily cipher through for what you're looking for. We actually have tailor-picked the things that are pertinent to this topic. So that's another great resource for you. Okay, so let's see, security team training. Where can we get such training? Would the police station offer that? Is there an organization that teaches that? Is that what you do?
Yeah, so I'll tell you that a lot of law enforcement agencies are really straying away from providing any formal training when it comes down to implementing policies or procedures, writing emergency action response plan. They might come out there and observe drills, and the reason for that is they're trying to decrease their liability as well. A lot of law enforcement agencies, and this has kind of changed in the last 5 years, because I'll tell you that, back in the early 2000s, law enforcement agencies, if you were a church, community organization, school, whatever, and you called the law enforcement agency, they said, hey, can we get some, can you guys give us a walkthrough and give us some, pointers of what you think we should do to make our church more secure, or do you have anything that you'd recommend as far as implementing for some of the emergency response plans and everything? They were much more willing to do it. But because of liability, it's that L word always comes up. Because of liability, they're not very willing to do that anymore. And I'll tell you that my agency and a lot of the agencies around the agency that I work for, they don't want to do it because of the liability. If they tell you to do something and things don't go right, they can be held civilly liable. So you find a lot of times that they're not willing to do it. But yeah, there are companies out there, like myself. As far as our company, we believe that we give the whole 360 wrap of services. But you can find companies that go out and just update and implement emergency action response plan. You will find companies that will just do CPTED, which is community policing through environmental design, and they will go out and just do assessments, facility assessments, and that's what we model our assessments after, is the CPTED assessments. So we look at everything from lighting to clear lines of sights to landscaping to bushes to doors to locking hardware to cameras. We basically go over about 150 point checklist when we do our assessments. But there are companies that do it. I just haven't found a company, and that's why we do what we do. Is I haven't found a company that offers every resource that we do.
Wonderful. So our next question is, you had mentioned the Report Now anonymous reporting. So how would the church get that, or where would they get that type of reporting system to be able to implement to their congregation?
So if you contact me either by phone or email, I can definitely ask you a few questions, and then I send over a proposal for that. It's pretty easy. I don't make much money off of Report Now because I have a web designer that I pay, and I pay for the web hosting, and it's a product that even when I present it to people, and they're actually surprised because it's not too much more than some web hosting and web designing. It's actually it's pretty affordable to implement, and we do all the maintenance. We do, if there's a change in the distribution list. The good thing about ours is my web designer, he can customize it for anything. If you didn't want to use it exactly like it is, and you had some recommendations saying, we would like to add, a couple different things as far as being able to report. You want to report Boolean, you can report Boolean. You want to report, cars driving too fast in the parking lot, you can report that. We can customize it for whatever reason people would want it to be customized for. But yeah, just contact me and I can definitely send a proposal out for that.
Perfect. Okay, well, we've had a lot of the same question over and over, so hopefully your questions were answered. The final question, is there a way to get a hard copy of this webinar? No, but what we did do is record this whole session, and the presentation is on the recording. It's an actual visual and audio. So after this is over, we will work to upload that, and we will put it on Ministry Pacific's Facebook page. So www.facebook.com/Ministry Pacific. Just look for that in the next couple of days, and you will have this that you're easily able to access. You can forward it to other members that were not able to attend today, to your security team for a point of reference. If you need to get in touch with Sergeant Ryan or Ministry Pacific, all of our contact information is on there. So with that, we just thank you again, Ryan, so much for coming and for setting up this whole presentation for us. I think we all desperately need it in this time, and we are just so thankful for you. So again, God bless you. And if anybody's question was not answered in this time, then please just feel free to email them directly to me at Ashley, ASHLEY, @imgdesign.org. And if you send me your questions, I can get in touch with Sergeant Ryan later, and I can get those answers back to you just as soon as possible. And then lastly, if you found this presentation helpful, we just invite you to join Ministry Pacific on Wednesday, June 6th. We have another webinar coming that's going to be featuring Charles Dare. Charles is Ministry Pacific's Buildings Information Systems Manager. And so he does all of the building valuations for all churches, and he creates the detailed analyses of church buildings. And during that presentation, he'll be shedding more light onto why it's such an important topic for church leaders to truly grasp and understand. So we hope you'll join us for that on Wednesday, June 6th. And again, we just thank you so much, Sergeant Ryan. Thank you for your service, and thank you for this presentation. We hope everybody has a great day, and God bless you all.
And thank you. I really appreciate it. And I know this is a lot of information in the 45 minutes that I presented, but I wanted to get as much of it out there as possible. So thank you again.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. You all have a great day.